Tonight, Donald Trump launches an extraordinary attack on Keir Starmer.
This is not Winston Churchill that we're dealing with.
Yes, you heard that right. Donald Trump says Keir Starmer is not Winston Churchill. He's not happy about the UK's contribution to the war in Iran so far. We'll be asking if the so-called special relationship is in crisis. The US is warning attacks on Iran will probably last 4 to 5 weeks, but could go on far longer. As fears of escalation continue to mount, the UK has announced it's sending a warship and drone-busting helicopters to Cyprus after an RAF base was hit in a drone strike. Well, the big worry is that events in the Middle East are going to hit the UK economy here. Our very own Ed Conway will take you through all the details. And we'll ask where it leaves Rachel Reeves's spring statement, which she delivered earlier. She claims the economy is growing and inflation is under control. Is that right? And we'll talk about the sensational new poll, which shows the surge in fortunes for the Green Party. All that and more with Oliver Coppard and Gillian Keegan, who'll be with us for the next hour. It's Tuesday. I'm Ali Fortescue, live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. Now, it wasn't so long ago that Keir Starmer was seen as a bridge between the EU and the US, someone who'd managed to navigate relations with Donald Trump. Well, that unlikely bromance seems to have come to an abrupt end. The last few days have seen several off-camera digs by the president over the speed at which the UK allowed use of its military bases. But tonight, he's gone further. Well, we're going to be getting full reaction from here in Westminster with our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates. We've got our Europe correspondent, Alistair Bunkle in Cyprus, and our US correspondent, Mark Stone. But first, let's hear what Donald Trump had to say about the UK.
By the way, I'm not happy with the UK either. That island that you read about, the lease, okay, he made it for whatever reason, he made a lease of the island. Somebody came and took it away from him. And it's taken 3-4 days for us to work out where we can land there. It would have been much more convenient landing there as opposed to flying many extra hours. So we are very surprised. This is not Winston Churchill that we're dealing with. I will say the UK has been very, very uncooperative with that stupid island that they have, that they gave away and took a 100-year lease, having to do with perhaps indigenous people claiming the island that never even saw the island before. What's that all about? And they ruin relationships. It's a shame. It's and that country, UK, and I love that country. I love it. My mother was born there. I love it. My mother was born there. My father was born. Right? He knows all about my father. My father was born there, so, you know, very places that you sort of automatically very feel warmly about. But the UK, what they're doing with energy and what they're doing with immigration is horrible.
Right, well, lots to digest there. Let's start in Washington. As you can see, we've got Sam Coates here in Westminster, Ali Bunkle in Cyprus, and Mark Stone for us in Washington. Mark Stone, let's start with you. What did you make of those extraordinary comments?
Well, I wasn't surprised, I have to say. It's been clear to me over the course of the past few days, in fact, going back about a week, I mean, behind the scenes, we were well aware that there were some very fraught diplomatic conversations ongoing because there was an expectation that at some point, maybe not last weekend, but at some point, the Americans may well take action in Iran, and it was the view of the British that that action may well not be legal, the judgment of Britain's Attorney General. And so behind the scenes, that clearly filtered through here. There were discussions here with diplomats, and it was fraught. And then, of course, the moment came, perhaps a little sooner than many had expected. I don't think many European and British diplomats were expecting it to happen this weekend. There was no heads up. And so when that moment came, it was very, very fraught. No, Keir Starmer said, you are not able to use, the Americans are not able to use the base at RAF Fairford and that island that Donald Trump described, that is Diego Garcia, precisely because the British position was that the threat from Iran was not imminent enough to warrant it to be legal, a military intervention in international law. So very, very, I mean, it was a broadside from Donald Trump, wasn't it? It was scathing. It was kind of like Starmer's Zelensky moment. We all remember Zelensky getting that ticking off in the White House over a year ago now. Well, Starmer wasn't even here for his Zelensky moment. It happened behind his back. And whether you're in Downing Street at the embassy here in Washington, it must have been very, very difficult to listen to. Because remember, the UK has prided itself on its ability to kind of have a sort of Trump whisperer, both here, whether it was Peter Mandelson, remember him, or Keir Starmer in London. That bridge between the awkward Europeans and the unpredictable Trump. Starmer thought he'd found that sweet spot. Well, today, it all kind of fell apart. Now, I can tell you that the British line that they are pushing, you would expect this, is look, the special relationship goes deeper than one president. It goes deeper than one issue. That, yes, right now, the geopolitical special relationship strand may be under some considerable strain, but there are many other strands to it, and it will all be fine. But what you didn't play there, and what's really interesting, is what Trump said about the Spanish, who've also blocked the use of one of their air bases by the Americans. He basically said today, I mean, whether or not he could do this, I don't know, but he basically said we're going to cut Spain off economically, what they have done. He went short of saying that about the UK, which I guess is a silver lining on a very, very dark, difficult diplomatic day. But yeah, really, really difficult. And I would say, I mean, I wonder whether Sam's got any views on this, but I would say that it is almost certainly the case that none of this has been made any easier because Britain here in America has gone through a revolution of 3 ambassadors. They had one, she was moved on, then Peter Mandelson came in for a period of time. He left, they were without an ambassador for a while, and the new ambassador has only recently arrived, getting into his brief, a very experienced diplomat. He was very senior in Downing Street for many years, but only just getting into his brief, only just getting comfortable with the characters in the Trump administration. That has not helped with what we saw unfold today.
OK, Mark, stay there because we want to come back to you. But let's bring in Sam with a UK perspective. I mean, this was something that Keir Starmer was seen to be navigating quite well, his relationship with Donald Trump.
Yeah, I think what's important here, though, is not to underestimate the extent to which this isn't something that's just done to Keir Starmer by Donald Trump, but that something that Keir Starmer's sort of actively been, if not quite curating, but certainly he has laid the path to. Keir Starmer's remarks in the Commons yesterday, just yesterday, were incredibly aggressive. He effectively called the military action illegal, and he then went on to say point blank, we don't believe that you do regime change from the sky. He has point blank criticised the American action. And I think knowing everything that we all know about Donald Trump, of course there was going to be pretty likely to be immediate and significant blowback. Now, what I cannot see in everything that Donald Trump is direct consequences for the UK beyond the rhetoric. Yes, it is language. Yes, it is bad language. But where does that actually take us? We're not in the same position, as Mark was saying, as Spain, where there is apparently a threat there to trade because of their stance about this. I think that actually what's been going on is over the last month or so, there has been a recalibration in Downing Street about how to be seen to be approaching the Trump administration. And as things got more difficult over the Chagos Islands, Keir Starmer has on a number of occasions taken a more robust line with the US president. In doing so, they will have known the consequences. They will have known the consequences look very much like what we got today. So I just play down a tiny bit the extent of the surprise and the ability also, it has to be said, to bounce back when it comes to Donald Trump.
It's really interesting, yes. It's about the tone as much as anything else. We'll come back to you, but I want to bring Mark back in because we're just reading from Iranian state media who are saying that Iran's Revolutionary Guard has launched a new wave of missile and drone attacks against Israel. Mark, is there a sense that this conflict is escalating? And the President was talking about how long it might last, wasn't he?
Yes, no, look, I think certainly there is the concern it could escalate. And we heard as well from the President in the Oval Office that he was surprised of the ways in which Iran has struck back and the targets that it has chosen, civilian targets in Gulf Arab countries. I mean, that one aspect shows you how the conflict is for now at least spreading. I've just come off a call with two senior administration officials speaking to us on background, so we can't name them, but I can tell you that they were right at the heart of the process, the negotiating process that fell apart, that led to the operation this past weekend. What these two officials sought to do was explain why the diplomatic path, those negotiations that were ongoing with the Iranians, why that fell apart, and why the military action that Donald Trump then authorized was the only course of action. And what they sought to do was demonstrate the imminence of the threat from Iran. Now, there's been plenty of discussion over the course of the past few days over just how imminent the threat was. We heard Mark Warner, who is the Vice Chair of the Intelligence Committee in the Senate, who had eyes on the intelligence before. His view was that there was no imminent threat. Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, said the imminent threat was because Israel was going to attack Iran and therefore Iran would strike back, creating an imminent threat to the United States. Well, now these two senior administration officials right up at the top of the White House side of things are saying that they believe Iran had the capability to produce a bomb within days or weeks. It was days or weeks away from the capability to produce a nuclear weapon. Now, did that mean they had the intent to do that? Well, that is a nuanced but important point. Another really interesting thing that they said is that they offered, in the negotiations last week, they offered Iran free nuclear fuel for life. In other words, they were saying to Iran, if you don't want a nuclear weapon, if genuinely your nuclear desires are all civil and not weapons-grade nuclear weapons, then we, the Americans, will, for life, provide you with a nuclear fuel for your civil program. And to that, so said the US officials, the Iranians responded that it would be an assault to our dignity to accept that. And it was that their right as Iranians to be able to enrich their own uranium, which they said was for civil purposes. And effectively, the Americans said that was complete nonsense. If you genuinely want a civil nuclear program, then why on earth wouldn't you accept our offer of nuclear fuel for life? So they called their bluff, effectively. A very, very interesting briefing on background from US officials as they seek now, post-fact, after the event, after the military invasion, or military escalation, I should say, they seek now to justify why they did what they did at the weekend.
OK, fascinating stuff. Thank you very much, Mark. Well, while all of this is going on, we very much get the sense tonight that UK's involvement in this war is getting deeper, with Keir Starmer announcing a significant deployment to Cyprus. Well, let's go straight to Cyprus now with Ali, who is there for us. Ali, tell us a bit about these warships, this warship that has gone to Cyprus.
Well, the context of this is that twice over the last couple of days, first on Sunday, then again yesterday, drones have been fired at Cyprus, specifically at RAF Akteri, the British military base on the island. Most of them were intercepted. One, on Sunday, hit the runway. I don't think the damage was extensive because I've seen planes taking off and landing from the base today, but they got through. And the base does host, and has done for many, many years, not just because of what's going on right now, US forces. I saw a U-2 spy plane taking off today, for example. In the past, there's been US Special Forces who have based themselves there to then project into the Middle East. You're very, very close to, I mean, Cyprus is in many respects part of the Middle East. You're a half-an-hour flight from Beirut. You're a half-an-hour flight, 35 minutes from from Tel Aviv. Hezbollah, the strongest, probably still, Iranian proxy, is, just the other side of the water. And so Britain is sending a Type 45 destroyer, HMS Dragon. It'll take about 6 days to get here. That has got good capabilities of shooting down ballistic missiles in particular. And they're sending some helicopters, Wildcat helicopters, that can shoot down drones as well. I think, and you've been speaking about it with Sam and Mark, this debate over whether or not Keir Starmer should or shouldn't have thrown Britain's lot in with America from the off, there is some subjectivity to that. Does it sit within international law or not? Should you stay on the sidelines, or should you go with one of your oldest allies? I think what is less objective is that, it was pretty obvious that, and if you study Iran, that they've always said they, in the event of a major attack on them, would widen the conflict out across the region. And whether or not you're involved does not necessarily mean that you're going to be able to sit by and not take the heat. I mean, just ask the Omanis, for example, who are at the centre of the mediation, who have stayed completely neutral throughout it, but, like Cyprus, have suffered a number of drone attacks around the country. And so I think people will say to Keir Starmer, in the British Ministry of Defence, the American Armada and the American military presence in the Middle East has been building up for weeks. They perhaps should have foreseen this coming and put these assets in place ahead of time.
And Ali, stay there, because also tonight we're getting fresh details about UK operations in the Middle East. We're told British jets have been defending regional partners.
Yes, to be clear, the British are not involved in terms of attacking Iran. Their involvement has been a defensive one so far, at least. Who knows what the coming days will bring. And some pictures have been released tonight, which I think we can show you, of RAF F-35 jets, so very advanced, fifth-generation jets, over Jordan, shooting down drones, helping protect Jordanian airspace, and by dint of that, helping protect Israeli airspace as well. Not only that, but RAF Typhoon jets operating with the Qataris on the other side of the Middle East, shot down drones that aimed at Qatar. And I understand that an anti-drone unit based in Iraq, based in northern Iraq, also shot down drones. So this is all kind of defensive. This is what the British government would say is defending their allies around the region. Also defending, of course, the British military bases around the region and the huge numbers of British nationals who live around the Middle East. But as you can see, whether or not Keir Starmer wanted Britain to be involved or not, they are quite rapidly becoming involved in this conflict that has a real regional dynamic to it.
And let's just briefly bring Sam back in. All of this, obviously lots of uncertainty, lots of money, potentially, that it's going to cost, and that in the context of the spring forecast today.
Look, we're at a crossroads. We don't know. Nobody knows how long this whole conflict begun in the early hours of Saturday is going to go on. And bluntly, there are just so many different paths that all countries, but particularly our country, could end up going down. And it raises so many really tricky issues for Keir Starmer. Just narrowly on defence, whether or not we're ready as a country for something that could end up being protracted. You saw warships being sent by Keir Starmer to Cyprus today, but the military establishment is crying out for more funding, more certainty about where some of the targets, when some of the targets for funding are going to be met. And the economic implications of what we could see are huge. We don't feel like we're a society ready or capable of particularly absorbing another big crisis, either militarily or economically. And I think that in the whirligig of British politics that keeps spinning, I think we're about to enter a new phase if this ends up being a protracted conflict. Who knows quite where it's going to take us? OK.
Thanks, Sam. And I should say we'll be getting more. Sam will be next to me throughout the course of the programme. Well, for more on President Trump's comments and the situation in the Middle East, earlier I spoke to Donald Trump's former US National Security Advisor, John Bolton. Thanks so much for talking to us. We've just had some words from Donald Trump, quite striking. He says he's not happy with the UK. This is not Winston Churchill we're dealing with, talking there about Keir Starmer. I'm interested to get your reaction to that. I can see you laughing.
Well, congratulations. The German Chancellor comes to visit President Trump in the Oval Office, and what else would you expect but an attack on Great Britain's government? He's obviously unhappy over the handling of the Chagos Islands and the Diego Garcia issue, although he can't remember the name of either one of them. And, that sets him off on talking about energy policy and windmills in the North Sea or something, I don't know, and immigration policy. So not a good day for Keir Starmer, but I guess he has other problems domestically.
Has the president got a point?
Well, I think energy prices, as I understand it, in the United Kingdom are second only to energy prices in Germany in terms of the European economies, and that's obviously not good. It's not going to be getting any better given the spike in oil prices we've seen as a result of the conflict with Iran. And on immigration, look, in America, it's what we call an 80-20 issue. People want the borders sealed against illegal immigrants. Different question about legal immigrants, but it's the subject of deportation in the United States is controversial, but keeping illegal immigrants out is not controversial at all.
Do you think this is a permanent damage to the special relationship?
No, look, Trump is an aberration. There's never been a president like Donald Trump before. With any luck, we'll never have one like it again. And the special relationship is not simply a function of relations between the two leaders. That's not how Trump sees it. He thinks all of international relations are embodied in the personal relationships between leaders, which is why when he thinks Vladimir Putin is his friend, that means something. If he's irritated at Keir Starmer, that means something. But for the two countries themselves, the relationships are far deeper, far broader, and we'll get over this trouble as well.
And it's interesting because Donald Trump has been praising France and Germany today. Is this all about Diego Garcia?
Well, it depends on what hour of the day it is. If you ask him tomorrow, he might be Keir Starmer's best friend again. And because Trump this is not a grand strategy. It's not even policy as we understand that term. It begins with the irritation of Diego Garcia, but once you press one button, then the immigration button follows and the energy button follows soon after that.
Obviously, we don't think the UK was warned about any of this. It's now taking our ships a long time to get to Cyprus. I mean, how do you think that Donald Trump should have, if he expected us to give him our air bases, have given us some more warning?
Well, what I don't understand, I have to say, is how Britain could have withheld consent for Diego Garcia, which is a joint UK-US base. It's on UK territory, the British Indian Ocean territory for sure, but it's a joint base.
From Keir Starmer, do you think?
Pardon me?
Do you think that was a mistake from Keir Starmer?
Look, it was a mistake to say we couldn't use RAF bases. The fact is the government of Iran, in its pursuit of nuclear weapons and its support for terrorism over decades, is just as much of a threat to Europe as it is to the U.S., to Israel, to the Gulf Arab states. And we are doing the right thing here, if Trump sticks to it long enough, to eliminate the Iranian regime and hopefully get a regime that cares about its people and that is not driven by this radical Islamist ideology. It ought to be that everybody in NATO and everybody in Europe is with us on this almost automatically. And it is puzzling, I will say, to many in America that they're not.
Do you think this is about regime change, or is this about Iran having less access to weapons? Because, I mean, the messages coming out of America are quite mixed. Pete Hegseth saying this is not a regime change style of war.
Well, the administration's messaging is terrible, and that's a real political problem for them. The logic of regime change is quite simple. To deny Iran nuclear weapons and support for terrorism, you have to change the regime. If you simply, for example, destroy the nuclear weapons capability, in a matter of time, the regime will build it back. So this is not a hard argument. Whether, in fact, Donald Trump is pursuing that, is sometimes he says he is until a few hours later when he says it's something else, I don't know. But I can also say that the number one priority for Israel is regime change. And we're working very closely with Israel. When they struck the supreme leader's compound on the first night of the attacks, they did so with information provided by the U.S. So we're fully on board with Israel's aim to get regime change. And I think inevitably, if we want to be free of the nuclear threat and free of the terrorist threat, regime change is required.
You say Donald Trump changes his mind. You're obviously someone who has worked with him closely. What's your sense of whether he will stick with this long enough for there to be a regime change?
Well, the best I can say is take 2 aspirin and call me in the morning. I don't know what he's going to do tomorrow. He will undoubtedly at some point declare total victory, regardless of what's happening on the ground. I think you can count on that. Whether, in fact, we will have achieved regime change is another matter.
And politically, in the US, how damaging is all of this for Donald Trump, do you think?
Well, I think he made a significant mistake in not preparing the groundwork, not explaining to the American people why the nature of the Iranian regime's threat required the action he's taking. I think he could have made the case. I think the case is very strong. I've been advocating it for 20 years. My regret is I didn't persuade Trump in the first term to do this. It would have saved a lot of pain and suffering across Israel and the entire Middle East if its terrorist proxies hadn't carried out many of their activities in the intervening years. But by not preparing the groundwork, he's now caused an enormous political fight with most of the Democrats, and perhaps most damaging for him with the isolationist element of his own political base. And if he doesn't get that corrected, it could be a real political constraint.
Just on the legitimacy of this war, whether or not it's legal, do you think there was a threat to the US, or was this a threat to Israel? What's your view on the legitimacy of this war?
Well, you know, for 47 years, they've been saying death to the great Satan, and that's pretty persuasive evidence of what their intention is. I think this is entirely legitimate military activity. I don't think we are required by any rational legal concept to say we have to put ourselves at risk until somebody else decides it's okay for us to take action before we're attacked with nuclear weapons. And I think it's something we should be fully prepared to defend, because if it's illegal to engage in this kind of preventive activity, then in the immortal words of Charles Dickens, a British author, then the international law is an ass.
What do you think the risks are now in terms of escalation?
Well, I think the Iranians have escalated. They've attacked the Gulf Arab states. They've attacked the United Kingdom. You know, they attacked the Akrotiri air base in Cyprus, which is on sovereign British territory. You'd think that would be enough to convince Prime Minister Starmer to engage in legitimate self-defense. I think it's a big mistake to have attacked the Gulf Arab states. They are now coming to the side of the United States and Israel. And it's a reflection of the real strategic shift that's occurred in the Middle East as the Gulf Arabs and others realized that the principal threat to them was Iran, the same perception that Israel's had for a long time. So I think actually if we can overturn the regime in Iran, the prospects for peace and security in the broader Middle East will increase dramatically.
And from a UK perspective, obviously we've agreed to this limited use of our air bases. Do you think it's inevitable that we get dragged further into the war?
You should be leading the charge among the Europeans in the defense of all of our common interest against this terrorist nuclear proliferating threat.
What do you mean exactly when you say we should be leading the charge?
Well, who else should lead Europe but Britain? I mean, isn't that what Prime Minister Starmer wants?
Well, let's bring in our panel for this evening. As you can see, Sam is still with us. We've got former Education Secretary Gillian Keegan and Mayor of South Yorkshire, Oliver Coppard. Right, Oliver, there's so much going on today. It's hard to keep track, but these comments for Donald Trump, they're pretty extraordinary. This is not Winston Churchill we're dealing with. He's not happy with the UK.
Well, look, I don't think this is a president that's going to be troubling Mount Rushmore anytime soon, unfortunately. I don't think any of us take this that seriously, do we? He is the last in a long line of people that Donald Trump has insulted. Keir Starmer is getting on with his job, quite rightly.
Wasn't he navigating that relationship quite well at one moment?
Well, yeah, he has a relationship with Donald Trump which has paid dividends for the UK. If you look at what he did on tariffs, that was good for the UK.
It's not paying dividends now, then?
Well, he's had a row. I mean, because he's standing up for the UK national interest, that's the right thing to do. It's absolutely right that Keir put Britain first and didn't just do what Donald Trump wanted. If the result is an insult, I think Keir will live with that.
People must be quite worried now about the trade deal, huge doubts over that, and now tariffs as well.
Well, look, it's a difficult job, isn't it, being Prime Minister? He's got to navigate all of that with the US. But the special relationship isn't just about a relationship between two people. It's a whole load of things. I was in the US last week meeting with Republican and Democratic politicians. There are all sorts of things that happen between our two countries, and it will survive long after Donald Trump and Keir Starmer have gone.
Gillian, what do you make of all this?
Well, he certainly isn't any Winston Churchill, but then nobody is. I mean, that guy's a hero. But neither is Donald J. Trump, Franklin D. Roosevelt, to be honest. But I think where it's more problematic, a little bit more problematic, and I agree with Oliver, it's hard to have a relationship with somebody who's so erratic. And you know, we saw how he was with Zelensky, and, you know, his behaviour is not respectful of world leaders, other world leaders. However, the two decisions that he called out, the Chagos Islands, and then saying they couldn't use the bases, and then they could use the bases. And I heard Darren Jones say today, extraordinary, he said, well, we said they couldn't use the bases, but then they could use the bases because it would shorten the war. And I'm thinking, surely, if you thought it would provide any advantage and shorten the war, you would say yes from the day one, you know, from the get-go. And, you know, there's this sort of legalistic between offensive and defensive, which everybody knows is, you know, literally a fig leaf. So I think the problem is the two actual decisions were not the best decisions that the Prime Minister's made. So, therefore, they look to have more substance. But, no, he isn't Winston Churchill, but I'm sure he's not trying to be Winston Churchill either. Sam,
do you think he's trying to be Winston Churchill?
I think that he doesn't try to be Winston Churchill. He's trying to be his own man, and even that is slightly enigmatic sometimes. But, Gillian, I just want to pick up on something that you were saying. Keir Starmer's position seems to me to be quite clear. The UK didn't join the initial bombing raid because the UK judged it to have been illegal. Now, do you think that was the right decision or not? That's a fairly binary decision made by the British government on a fairly binary basis. Do you go along with that or do you reject that?
The law is not binary in this, and international law is not binary. It's very contested and it's very highly contested. And it all swings on what is offensive and what is defensive. So if Iran says, we want to annihilate Israel and we want to annihilate the USA, and threatens to put their warships at the bottom of the sea, is it reasonable to suggest that you would take defensive action? And this is where it all comes on to how you want to interpret it. It's not as if they haven't, you could have said, if you wanted to, the British Prime Minister could have said, we have had 20 lethal activities on our soil in the last year. Are you able to defend the British people and defend yourself? Is it offensive or defensive when you are responding to that?
But we have.
So I think there's enough, and many lawyers would come down on that side, it's contested. We have senior congressmen
who've seen the intel in private saying that there wasn't an imminent threat, which is one of the big qualifications for a raid. So, but I suggest they're probably Democrat congressmen. Right, so this is a political thing as well. So the Democrats will say one thing, and this is what I mean about it being contested. I mean, I was a Foreign Office Minister just for a short period of time, but it was Africa, and I used to go to the high side, as they say, and I saw the intelligence reports. It is amazing what you get in the intelligence reports. I'd be amazed, actually, if they wasn't an intelligence report that said that Iran was no threat at all to the UK, Israel or the US. Clearly
Let's bring Ollie
not.
back in, because I can see you shaking your head.
Well, just to be clear, look, neither of us are legal scholars, I think it is fair to say, right? But
Keir is, right?
Indeed, right? My understanding is it has to be an imminent threat. So it has to be an imminent threat from Iran towards, in this case, the US.
And imminent is the key
Israel.
word.
And imminent's the key word. That's my understanding. Keir, as you say, is a lawyer. And luckily, we have a lawyer as our Prime Minister. They've taken a decision.
That's not lucky at all. And actually, one could argue that the speed at which Iran attacked all those countries in the Gulf, that wasn't something that took no planning. So was the threat imminent? If they could do that within hours, they could have done it anyway. And we're not lawyers, but it's
has
definitely
talked
contested.
about, you know, do we need to... There are all these rules, but if people aren't enforcing them and they're not being followed by countries like Iran, are we the last country to abide by that kind of rules-based order?
We could have a conversation for a long time this evening about the rights and wrongs of international law as we understand it, but neither of us are legal scholars. I think it is fair to say that the government have a significant number of lawyers on the books, as well as one in charge who are taking a look at this every single moment of every single day. All I would say is anybody in this situation, be it Kemi Badenoch, be it Zach Polanski or Nigel Farage, who say there is an easy answer to this problem of war in the Middle East, is selling you a bridge.
No, I don't think anyone thinks it's an easy...
There is not an easy solution to this problem, which has been created by the US and Israel attacking Iran. There is not an easy answer. I think Keir has put himself and us as the UK in the best possible position of saying, look, we are taking a defensive action, we are being sensible and pragmatic, and to me, and I think to most people out there, that feels pretty sensible.
That's very telling, though, that you just said it was created by the US and Israel, and I would say it's created by Iran. 20 lethal, potentially lethal attacks in this country?
Forgive me. What I mean is they have sent warheads towards Iran. That is what has caused this
despotic, theocratic country that's killing its own people.
No tears for that, Ayatollah.
Is there a danger now, just final thought from you, that we get dragged further into this?
Well, one person's defensive is another person's offensive, and we are now sending ships to Cyprus, and clearly the tone has changed and the approach has changed. It all depends where this goes next. I hate to give you a politician's answer on a politics show as a non-politician, but we just don't know how and where this is going to unfold. But the more assets you have in the region, the more engaged you feel you need to be, there is just a greater chance of doing something that maybe at the start of the conflict you wouldn't have been prepared to do. OK, thank you all. We'll come back to you. And that story is sure to feature heavily on our late-night programme, The Wrap, tonight from 10 p.m. Here to discuss all of today's big stories and the best of tomorrow's papers will be political commentator Adam Bolton and journalist and broadcaster Sonia Soda. Now, gas and oil prices have shot up since the conflict in the Middle East intensified. There are warnings about the knock-on for the economy and an increase in inflation that we could, of course, see here in the UK as the Chancellor delivered her spring forecast today. Well, our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, has been taking a look at the uncertainty ahead.
Now, normally when the government unveils a big set of forecasts, which has just happened with the spring forecast, we'd be talking all about that. But obviously there's so much going on with the Iran war and also the implications for the rest of us. It's worth starting by focusing on that. And we'll start with this. This is showing you the wholesale gas price in the UK, the month-ahead gas price, which is typically the one that your bills are based on, but not immediately. So anything happening here won't affect you potentially until the second half of the year. Look at what has just happened here. In the past 2 days, that is up by 98%. Basically, it has doubled over the past 2 days. And two things to note here. First of all, obviously, that looks very scary and very high. Worth saying, if I take the same data and kind of go back, not just the past year, but go all the way back to 2021, what you can see here, that rise, which is basically what I've just shown you there with a different axis, that's the highest since late 2022, but it's nothing like what we saw in the early years of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. However, the rate at which it's changing is pretty much unprecedented. So I want to do the same thing, same data, but rather than looking at the overall levels, this is just looking at the extent to which it changes over any kind of 48-hour period. So, you know, it's up, down, up, down, up, down all the time. But here's what's significant. The latest 48 hours, the rise over that period, basically doubling, is the biggest two-day increase that we have seen ever. So it's actually bigger than any two-day period in the first 2 years of the Ukraine war. So levels are much lower for the time being, thankfully, but the rise is much quicker, much more of a shock on the system. And of course, the big question is now, how long does that last? But what we do know is if it lasts a while, it's going to have a bearing on everything else. And here's one way of thinking about that. We've just had these latest numbers from the OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibility, about inflation in the UK. They are based on the assumption that gas prices, this is kind of a forward curve for gas prices, as known, that gas prices stay low. So that's what's baked into the latest forecast from the government. But this is what's just happened. So the price curve has changed completely, suggesting prices are, going pretty much through the roof and then potentially coming down in 2028 or so. And based on that, you have to look at numbers like this. These are the latest inflation forecasts. So that the blue bar is last time around, red bar is this time around. And basically, well, look, inflation's really flat based on this. But if that's not the case, if energy prices push it up, it could be very different indeed. This is showing you kind of one estimate of that. It's from Capital Economics, and they've basically taken their inflation forecast and said, well, look, let's think about a few scenarios. Let's imagine that there is an energy price shock, but it's temporary. It doesn't change things all that much. Inflation still stays close to that dotted line, 2%, which is the Bank of England's forecast. If it's a bigger shock, so energy prices kind of going higher, then, yeah, it's a little bit higher. If it's a longer-lasting shock, then you're not talking about 2%. You're talking about maybe getting towards 3%. All of which is why, this has a bearing on everything, on our livelihoods, on interest rates as well. And it means that the energy price shock we might be just about to live through could have serious consequences.
Now, as mentioned, the Chancellor updated the Commons on the state of the UK economy in her spring forecast today. Rachel Reeves defended her economic policy, insisting that her plans are the right ones. But of course, all of that was overshadowed by the uncertainty in the Middle East, as our political editor, Beth Rigby, explains.
The spring statement's meant to be a big deal because it's the moment that the Chancellor updates us on how well or not the economy's doing. But look, it all felt a bit pointless today against the backdrop of a potentially massive war in the Middle East that could throw all of the Chancellor's plans off course. And I have to say, watching it felt like I was living a bit in a parallel universe of normal times when it's anything but. And to be fair, the Chancellor did acknowledge that elephant in the room when she stood up in the Commons.
This government has the right economic plan for our country. A plan that is even more important in a world that in the last few days has become yet more uncertain.
Putting it bluntly, the government has no idea at the moment whether this is a short-term shock that will stabilise quickly or a much more profound hit to the global economy that's going to have massive reverberations here. But against that backdrop, the Chancellor adopted a keep calm and carry on approach as she tried to argue about how her stewardship of the economy had put Britain in a stronger place.
The choices this government have made are the right ones. Stability in our public finances, interest rates and inflation falling, living standards rising.
And when it comes to the forecast from the independent fiscal watchdog, the Office of Budget Responsibility, on the downside, growth's been downgraded for 2026 and unemployment is higher than expected. On the plus side, the Chancellor noted that interest rates have fallen, borrowing costs are coming down and inflation is falling faster than expected, all allowing her to argue that the government really is intent on tackling the cost of living.
I know that the question that people will ask themselves at the next election is this: are me and my family better off? I am determined that the answer will be yes.
This war in the Middle East is a stark reminder that things are not entirely in her control. And I don't want to alarm you, but in the past couple of days, gas prices have shot up, oil prices are on the rise, and if that morphs into a longer-term problem, there are real knock-on effects. The Resolution Foundation think tank says that if gas price increases of the last few days are sustained, well, that could mean that energy bills go up by 500 quid in July. So for a government promising us all that they will drive down the cost of living, this is the stuff of nightmares. And when you think of it like that, Donald Trump trolling the Prime Minister over his handling of Iran really is the least of Starmer's worries right now.
OK, we're just going to bring you a bit of breaking news. We're talking about the economic effect of this conflict, and we've just had this post from Donald Trump. He says, effective immediately, I've ordered the United States Development Finance Corporation to provide, at a very reasonable price, political risk insurance and guarantees for the financial security of all maritime trade, especially energy, travelling through the Gulf. This will be available to all shipping lines. If necessary, the United States Navy will begin escorting tankers through the Strait of Hormuz as soon as possible. No matter what, the United States will ensure the free flow of energy to the world. The United States' economic and military might is the greatest on earth. More actions to come. Thank you for your attention to this matter, President Donald J. Trump. Sam, can we get your reaction to that positive news potentially for the Strait of Hormuz?
It's fascinating. Look, in the first 48 hours after the bombing raid, what you saw is that strip of water between the UAE and Iran, which is absolutely essential, you can see it on the screen there, for containers with oil and liquid gas. About 10% of the traffic was going through that absolutely key junction in our shipping lanes. And the reason for that wasn't just the out-and-out threat, although there were attacks from Iran on some of the shipping containers, but because insurers had pulled their insurance for those boats. And frankly, if you're not insured, you can't sail. And massive global insurers were going, the risk has just got too high. So what Donald Trump is doing is he's beginning the process of trying to work out whether the US government might be the insurer of last resort. So we'll see how that works, but that's one of the preconditions to get boats back through the Straits of Hormuz.
OK, really interesting. Sam, thanks for your immediate analysis there. Well, we were just talking about the spring statement, or forecast, as they'd like to call it. I got more on this earlier with the Exchequer Secretary to the Treasury, Dan Tomlinson. Has this all been blown out of the water by what's going on in the Middle East? Because obviously we don't know what impact that is going to have on prices.
Yes, the Chancellor said today that she's got the right plan for the country. That's something that was true a week ago, and I think it brings it into even more sharp relief today that the strategy that this government's got on the economy to provide more security for family finances, but also, and crucially, to provide more security for the public finances is the right one and is the thing that will bear fruit for us in the end. You know, if we can get our borrowing costs down, so we're spending less on debt interest, we're spending £100 billion on debt interest when we're suffering from the high interest rates that Liz Truss's chaos put on the whole economy. If we can get that down, we can have billions of pounds extra not being spent on debt interest and being spent on our public services. And we're seeing borrowing come down. We'll be borrowing less than in any point in the 2020s, in the year to come, with borrowing falling by 1% of GDP. That is just the sort of thing that we need to do to make sure that we've got the fiscal flexibilities that we need to have in case the UK economy and this shock develops. Obviously, it's really uncertain at the moment. We have seen moves in markets today, and the Chancellor and the Prime Minister will, I'm sure, be monitoring it really closely in the weeks and in the days and weeks ahead. But we have, at this statement, the OBR's come forward and said, actually, the headroom, the amount of wiggle room we've got compared to our fiscal rules has gone up from 22 to 24 billion to provide that stability in the public finances.
I guess that headroom might well be wiped out.
Well, we don't know what will happen. Obviously,
But are you prepared for that?
There's been moves in markets today, and we obviously hope that we can get to a situation in the Middle East where we don't have prices increasing and that having a knock-on effect on living standards here in the UK. But we are taking steps, and we've already been proactively taking steps to support people with the cost of living. So from April, we're taking £150.
Sorry, but is the truth of today that these forecasts, you wanted to give good news, and sadly for you and for all of us, they might just be out of date?
Well, we just don't know yet, for example. We have seen that the price of stocks and shares, for example, has been up and down even since the forecast closed a few weeks ago.
Energy price has got to be a concern.
We have seen moves in the energy market today, and we will wait to see how that plays out. But because the Chancellor has made sure that she's prioritised getting the public finances in good order, with borrowing continuing to fall in every single year of the forecast, getting that borrowing down, meaning we can spend less on debt interest and have that headroom, we do have that flexibility to be able to step in and provide support. And that's exactly what we have done and been able to do with this £150 that we'll be taking off people's energy bills from April this year.
OK, let's bring our panel back in, and Sam is still with us, Gillian and Oliver Coppard. Oliver, I mean, it's meant to be the spring forecast, And obviously we are talking about this. And is it worth the paper it's written on, given the backdrop?
Well, look, it certainly throws a spanner in the works, doesn't it? I don't know that you can call it a spring statement that is necessarily going to live long in the memory because, frankly, it is all up in the air. So, yeah, no, it makes it incredibly difficult for HREs and the government to plan long-term when you've got things like this happening.
Gillian?
Well, the numbers before this conflict, so all of this is OBR's forecast before this conflict, are disastrous. And the thing you find when you spend a long time in business is politicians may lie, but numbers don't. So the growth forecast for next year is brutal. It's down, and that's before this conflict. Everything's down except unemployment, which is up, and that's obviously hitting young people as well. So actually the numbers are really, really bad, and that is before anything that you've been talking about today. So I worry if you've cut off the growth engine of the economy, which is effectively what the first two budgets did, and you still think you've got the right plan, even though all those red lights are flashing, then I do worry, because really they should be reversing some of those disastrous things that have actually impacted business growth. Because the only thing that's going to get us out of this is cutting welfare spend, which is going up by 18 billion next year, and making sure that our economy is firing on all cylinders.
Is Gillian right? Have you cut off the growth engine of the economy?
Well, I mean, look, Gillian says speaks as a business person, but she's reading from Tory talking points, which is fine. We all do that. The note inside the book, and it's fine. We all do that. But look,
no, these are just the facts. I mean, these are just the numbers.
I can see the Tory press release, but it's fine.
They're the OBR numbers.
Look, it's fine.
You're both from different parties.
Indeed,
you know that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they know that.
Absolutely.
But they are the OBR numbers.
Absolutely, it's perfectly fine to talk about Tory talking points. All I would say is, in my neck of the woods in South Yorkshire, things are getting better. Right, and on the ground, in places like Barnsley or Rotherham or Doncaster or Sheffield...
Are they really getting better?
Yeah, absolutely. So, productivity in Rotherham...
I can see Sam's eyes.
You need to do vox pops in that place and see what the people say.
Let's check. I mean, you've got a computer in front of you. In Barnsley and in Doncaster, wage growth is outstripping the national average by 2 times. In Sheffield, it has been the fastest-growing core city in output terms since 2017. In Rotherham, we have seen 64% productivity growth over the last 20 years. So
is that going to power our country's economy? Because that's actually what we're talking about.
In South Yorkshire.
The growth's down from 1.9 to 1.1%.
Certainly going to power people in South Yorkshire. What I would say is...
And young people are getting jobs in South Yorkshire?
Speaking as the Mayor of South Yorkshire, I am absolutely worried about unemployment. I certainly am. I'm worried about youth unemployment in particular. I'm worried about what's happening in the Middle East and the knock-on consequences for businesses in my neck of the woods. But I would also say, when it comes to interest rates, when it comes to inflation, when it comes to the things that we are doing on the ground that are making a difference, it's chalk and cheese. My 2 years when I first got in were under a Tory government. I now have a Labour government to work with. And for places like South Yorkshire, I can't speak for the rest of the country, but for places like I've just reeled off the numbers.
Inflation was lower.
Places like South Yorkshire, it is much better now than it has been up to now over the last 15 years.
Is that a fair assessment, Sam, do you think?
I wouldn't dream of going toe-to-toe with the Mayor of South Yorkshire over the particular growth paths of certain towns and cities. I'd make a different point. This whole spring forecast has been presented as steady as she goes. I'm not so sure when you look at it. There are so many bombs that are going to need to be diffused. Defence spending, if they're going to get it up to the path that Keir Starmer says, it's going to need £40 billion. Special educational needs. The OBR says Bridget Phillipson didn't put forward a plan. No idea how much money is going to be saved through it. That needs to be sorted. Migration, that's potentially another big black hole for the autumn. Under the guise of it's all OK, not much is changing, I thought what we did learn today is that even without Iran, things are going to get a lot more tricky for the Chancellor.
So many things that we need to talk about and so much going on in the world. Now, before you go, we have got some really fascinating YouGov for Sky News polling that shows the Green Party leapfrogging Labour into second place. Here's a familiar face revealing the news on the Sky News app earlier.
This bombshell polling is going to upend everyone's political calculations. Look at this. The Greens, for the first time ever, in second place, leapfrogging Labour, now in third place in the aftermath of the Gorton and Denton by-election. This is a Sky News Times YouGov weekly voting intention poll. It seems like the Gorton and Denton by-election has given the Greens a wave of publicity to propel them into heights they've never been at before. Every age category under 50 now has the Greens in the lead. Where's this going to leave Labour?
OK, let's bring our trio back in one last time. Gillian, is this Clegmania all over again?
It's something strange, right? I mean, I don't know, it almost seems to me, and maybe this is partly Trump as well, that politics has become a little bit more like a game show with these sort of, polls and opinion polls and things that change. And actually, the real job of running the country and the economy, as we were talking about previously, is really about the hard yards of doing, well, first of all, not getting in the way and damaging businesses and business confidence, but also of building up employment prospects for young people, skills, etc., our public services. And yet, all of these policies, they wouldn't survive. They wouldn't survive an OBR forecast. They wouldn't survive a weather forecast, I doubt. But it is like the gamification. There's a poll that can tell you everything. I remember the ones that showed Liz Truss when she was popular.
Briefly, Ollie, do you think your party is facing the right way? Should they be fighting the Greens more?
Look, polls are snapshots. They're not predictions. I don't think it changes anything fundamentally on the ground. I'm the mayor of South Yorkshire. It's not going to change what I do tomorrow. I hope it won't change what the government do tomorrow. I've got to run the country. I've got to help run South Yorkshire, and that's got to be based on what's right for the place, not what a poll says. So let's see what happens in 2029, or in my case, 2028. But frankly, it's one poll. Let's see what the next one shows, and the next one, and the next one, and the next one after that. But ultimately, there's only one poll that matters.
Were you surprised by the polling, Sam?
The Greens have had so much attention that I wasn't hugely... It does feel a bit like Clegmania to me, where the whoosh of publicity did reflect in the polls. Look, I think there's a point to respond to what everyone's been talking about. Politicians don't need to respond to polls. They don't need to get knocked off course by journalists, commentators, like the talking points of others. But I do think it's a reflection of just how small some of our politics at the moment, that doesn't seem to be exactly what's happening with our government, just as it happened with the last government. Can't we have bigger politicians that can set the agenda themselves for once?
Have you been struck by the differences in views on what's going on in Iran between all the parties, briefly?
It's unsurprising that they're all slugging it out. It's sort of 50-50. You've got Lib Dems and Greens going one way, Tories and Reform going the other way. Keir Starmer likes that by being in the middle.
OK, Sam Coates, Gillian Keegan, Oliver Coppard, thank you all so much. That is it from us tonight. I'll see you tomorrow at 7 o'clock. Up next, it is UK Tonight with Sarah, Jade, me. Thanks so much for watching. The Politics Hub will be back tomorrow.